Top of morning, we're going to the land of Fae folk, rolling green hills, and potatoes. Hot dang, I love potatoes. But be prepared for the darker side of Ireland, because Fae folk can be tricky, and every place in the world has its own crazy people and folklore monsters. Enjoy these allegedly true scary stories from Ireland. If you want your story to be featured in a video, I'm looking to hear scary backpacking stories next. So if you've gone backpacking and encountered or seen something spooky, send me your story at darkstories.org. Now, let's begin. Late Night Visitor from Gare. I'm from a little village in the south of Ireland. My whole life I've experienced paranormal activities. My house was a former army barracks. I was 14 years old then, and each night I would sleep, I would hear something talking in my ear. I could feel a cold finger running down my earlobe. I remember lying in bed being forced down by something. I felt a presence holding me down. I would be semi-asleep, and I would awake screaming, with a demonic voice around me saying, "No." I knew immediately this was no hallucination or sleep paralysis event. It was too vivid. It felt too real. It felt like something was trying to take my own body from me, but I wasn't going to let it. Ever since the first time this happened, things were never the same. This particular story began with the passing of a close friend of mine. I was calling out for him every day, asking for him to show me a sign. I missed him, and over my life a lot of strange things have happened, and I wanted more than anything to believe in an afterlife. At that time, I firmly believed in spirits and entities. Of course I would, after that experience that night. I moved into a new house then with my partner. Everything was fine at the start of it, until I began to see shadows in the corner of my eyes. Our dog would bark and growl at nothing in the middle of the room. I knew that we were being visited by something, but it didn't bother me then. I hoped that it was my friend visiting me. Not to mention my mother always said, it's the living you should be afraid of, not the dead. My then partner at the time and I were watching a movie. Believe it or not, it was Paranormal Activity. To scare my partner, I began to say things to him, like pretending to call the ghosts out, telling them to come and show themselves, to do something to prove they were there. But we were just laughing and joking around, not actually taunting the spirits. We finished the movie, and we were making our way to bed. It was pretty late, around 1 a.m. All of a sudden, the landline phone started to beep. When you lose the phone, you can press a button on the base to find the phone when it's lost. The problem with that was, the actual phone didn't have the batteries in it. I jumped up out of bed and ran to the bedroom door to find the phone. It was outside on the landing, right in the middle of the floor. We had just gotten it and hadn't set it up fully, but I know that I had left it on its base. I admit I was a bit creeped out by this, not only to see it move to somewhere I hadn't left it, but to also hear it beep as if someone had pressed the button on the base. But who could have done it if we were both in bed? I tried to laugh it off, but I was scared. I put the phone on the base and went back to bed. No sooner had I put my head on the pillow, the smoke alarm suddenly began to beep, the way it does if you take the plastic case off and hold the test button. It was at least 15 feet off the ground, due to high ceilings, and you would need a ladder to press it. The beeping continued though. It couldn't have been a battery issue though, as we had ours connected to the main power. At this stage I was freaking out. When I looked at my partner, his eyes were watery with terror. I was almost at that point too. I tried my best to reassure him that it would be okay. We tried to head back to sleep as the beeping stopped. I wanted to put this down as just a visit from a spirit who wasn't trying to be bothersome and simply wanted to say hello. Now, beside our bed was a window and a blind. It's the type of blind that could be opened by a heavy cord. Out of nowhere, it pulled itself up and open, shaking violently. The window wasn't open. There was no wind at all in the room, and neither of us were anywhere close to the blind. It wasn't us, yet somehow the blind was shaking, as if a man had grabbed it and began slinging it around as hard as they could. After that, I wasn't so sure that the spirit was friendly. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. After that, I never joked or messed around with spirits again. My partner at the time and I are no longer together. Shortly after this event, we moved out of the house. We used to talk about it a lot. We've spoken over the years, but I know when we do see each other, this would be a story we would remember for the rest of our lives. Be careful what you ask for, because sometimes they're listening, and they'll come for a visit. I thought I got away from it after I moved, but not too long after settling in, I began hearing the tiniest footsteps running around the house early in the morning or late at night, and sometimes I even hear them laugh. The Organ in the Corner, from Anonymous. Now, I'm entirely aware this sounds like some plot to a B-grade horror movie, but it's a scary story my dad still tells at dinner parties to freak people out. One he swears up and down is true. But when it happened, it was actually terrifying. When I was around 6 years old, my family and I moved from England to Northern Ireland, and my parents bought this gorgeous old house. I know, your standard white people. The place was 200 years old, middle of the countryside, obviously needing a bit of work. My mom and dad began renovating as soon as we moved in, so my childhood smells of paint stripper and plasterboard. But stuff got weird. I used to play in a small, almost greenhouse kind of balcony. It was on the roof above the front door and glass all around. Every time my dad had stopped drilling or hammering, I remember hearing something that sounded like piano. I mentioned this to my father, asking where it was coming from, and my dad would shrug, seemingly passing it off as weird kid stuff. You know how kids say weird things and often don't even remember saying them. After that, I began having these reoccurring dreams about hearing, once again, what I thought was a very loud and odd-sounding piano. I would walk through the house and check all the rooms in the dream, finally coming to look in the front room. And there would always be this man in the corner playing his piano, which was huge and full of big pipes. I would later learn that what this instrument was an organ. When I asked my mom what the big piano in churches were called, as that was what this reminded me of, she gave me that as an answer. Once again, my parents brushed this off as me being a weird kid, until it began happening to my mom. The room always felt a few degrees colder than the rest of the house. It was an old house, yes, but this room always felt cold no matter how the rest of the house felt. She was stripping some god-awful orange paint off the floorboards, as the previous owners 10 years ago put down some interesting interior design. It was then she suddenly smelled this overwhelming scent of malt whiskey and cigarettes. No one in the house smoked, and we were the only people for miles. There was no furniture in the room either at the time, to even have whiskey near it. She said to my dad over dinner the next evening, jokingly, "Ellie's ghost friend must love whiskey, 'cause that room always smells like it. May be embedded in that wallpaper." I stripped the walls bare to stone, stripping the floorboards, opening all the windows, and redoing it, That room still smells so distinct. But it happens, I guess. I continue to have my dreams, always feeling the overwhelming sensation of never being alone in that house, even as I grew older. But here's the creepier part. My dad was in the local pub one night after the house was nearly finished. He was talking to his mate at the bar. His mate mentioned to the owner that my dad had bought the hunting lodge, which is how they referred to our house for whatever reason. We only vaguely knew that the house was related to the castle in the local village, and turns out it was a hunting lodge apparently. The owner goes on about how it's a gorgeous house and he's glad someone's fixing it up. But then he says, "Is it still haunted?" My dad, being a skeptical man, laughed and said about it appearing like a stereotypical horror house. Then the barman goes, "No, honestly, the guy who used to play the organ for the hunt after they came back, he died playing that organ. Massive heart attack. He was famous around these parts. The pub was still open even then, and apparently he was maybe a bit too fond of the drink and cigarettes. My dad hadn't told a single soul about the weird pestering about the funny smell at our place and the weird piano sounds I complained about. Again, he simply assumed it was just kids being weird kids. It's the only thing that my dad has said is unexplainable in his life. The house still never feels quite empty, despite that room being cold and occasionally smelling like whiskey. It's quite comforting in a way. Like the old organ player is just keeping an eye on the house he loved. His old home. The following story appeared in an old episode titled Disturbing Things That Happened on Farms. It's called Pooka, and was submitted by Neaslob. I accidentally re-added it to this script, which I actually do quite a lot. I read so many stories that I only vaguely remember the ones I have read. I do my best to keep track of what I've already read, but after having to switch from my old website, which was taken over by malware, a lot of the stories that I had marked as read suddenly weren't marked that anymore. But in this case, I really like this story, and I hope you will too. Enjoy! This is the story of the scariest moment of my life, which occurred in 2002 in rural Ireland. I am a city boy through and through. I was born and raised in Waterford City in the province of Munster in Ireland. I was attending college in Waterford, where I was studying software development. Yeah, I was one of those computer geeks. Every summer, I worked on my uncle's farm in County Wexford to get money to pay for my college, and this is where I was when this story happened. My uncle was a very quiet guy and a very easy guy to work for. I spent my days plowing and baling the fields with him, along with my cousins, over the summer. It was the classic off-the-books job. I got to live with him rent-free, and I received €200 a week. One day after we were done plowing for the day, my cousins and I were out eating dinner on the picnic benches when I saw this large, dark eagle hovering over the farm. I remember pointing it out to my oldest cousin Sean by saying, "I've never seen an eagle like that before." And that's when things got really weird. My cousins looked up at it, then they looked at each other. Their faces had blank expressions, and then Sean looked at the youngest brother Patrick and said, "Quickly, round up some corn and leave it out for it." I just sat there in utter confusion as my youngest cousin Patrick stood up and headed down towards the fields. I asked Sean, "Why are you giving that huge thing corn when they don't even eat it?" Sean replied sternly, "Look, no eagle is that big. That is a pooka." At this stage, I just assumed my cousins were the classic superstitious country people. I informed them that I did not really know what a pooka was, and they told me that it was a malevolent, shape-shifting being that usually takes the form of large, black eagles and black horses. They would besiege people's property and try to lure them out with their human-like speech to take them in the night. They said if we hadn't left out corn, then one of us would not be there in the morning. I don't know what to think of this, but I do know I've never seen an animal like that. A jet black eagle with a wingspan of at least 50 feet. Please tell me that there's an animal that matches that description somewhere in the world. The next few stories are from the same person, Scotsdiesel, who shares with us today a few of their scary experiences in Ireland. They're titled Tales from an Irish Traveler. Number 1. The Kelpie. This happened in 1965, or rather, it began then. In Celtic legend, there is an evil creature that lives in bodies of water called Kelpie, or water horse. I believe my uncle and I saw one on a small lake 20 years apart, and the consequences changed the lives of everyone involved forever. In 1965, my uncle and 2 of his friends decided to go by the lake to swim. They were avid swimmers. First, they wanted to gather wood and oil drums from a nearby derelict factory to build a raft so that they could go to the small pile of rocks known as the island. As they were building the raft, my uncle would notice splashes in the water as if something had been thrown in. My uncle accused his mates of simply trying to wind him up. They all denied doing it, so everyone was thinking everyone else was trying to scare them. They quickly finished the raft and launched it into the water. After a chilly afternoon relaxing on the raft in the still water, they decided to get closer to the island. Near the island, they felt a pull or tug on the raft from underneath, then a violent rocking motion until one of his friends suddenly fell in. My uncle leaned over the side to haul his mate back on, and that's when he saw something under the water. Shockingly, this thing had its arms around the waist of his friend, something that had the face of an ugly horse with eyes bulging and a weird-looking mane, as my uncle put it. Try as much as he could, my uncle and his other friends became tired, and they watched their mate slip away from them below the water. Their friend's body was recovered the next day. After my uncle told me what he personally saw in the water, he swore me to secrecy, just wanting everyone else to believe it was simply a tragic accident. My uncle hadn't told me about this incident until after I was involved in a similar one, 20 years later. It was the summer of 1985. I was in Scotland, where there was another rare mini heat wave. I was 12 years old, and it was too hot for school, so around 10 of us bunked off school and made our way to the lake, or loch. We had a good day making campfires, and we found rope and made a swing. All that time I was feeling uneasy, as if I was being watched, so I told a couple of my mates. But they laughed at me, putting it down to some of us being naked or just in our underwear. But I just couldn't shake that feeling. As we were on the swing, one of us noticed splashes in the water. "Big bloody pike, that," one of my mates said. "Nah," said another. "One of you is throwing stuff." After we got bored on the rope swing, some of the older lads, who must have been around 15, decided to see who could swim out farther and farther to a tiny island. Well, more a pile of rocks further out. I was younger and not a strong swimmer, so as the older boys were doing this, I just sat on the rocks on the shore, dangling my feet in the water, and occasionally lowering myself to the waist. Suddenly, I felt something grab hold of my leg, something that felt like fingers, but with the texture of slime. It had a powerful grip too, but as I was trying to pull myself up, I said, "Mother of Jesus," or something panicky like that. And it suddenly released its hold. My friends heard the commotion and saw me struggling. They swam over and asked me what happened. I told them, but they laughed at me again, telling me it was just a crab, until someone pointed out finger-like marks on my leg. Crabs don't do that. One of the older lads said it was either leeches or an eel, maybe, and being younger, we believed it. Or at least I pretended to believe it, for fear of ridicule. The feeling I had of being watched grew stronger after that, but it felt like there was anger to it. The air felt foreboding. I was so disturbed I just sat on top of a large rock by the edge and watched the older lads resume their macho game of who could swim the farthest. Then it happened. One of the boys furthest out, at least twice as far as the others, began screaming, "Help! Something's got my legs!" From my vantage point, he looked like he was fighting against something, and it looked like something just under the water, silvery but in a definite shape, was grabbing hold of him. The boy released another horrendous scream, continuing to splash and gargle in the water, until there was silence. The water became still, and the silver, shadowy figure was gone. I didn't tell anyone about the silver shadow or gray outline that I saw. I was too scared, and I knew they wouldn't believe me. Divers recovered my friend's body that night, and we were told by the police he had either gotten a cramp or he had tangled himself in something underwater and drowned. Several years later, in an English city, in a random bar, I surprisingly met up with one of the lads from that day, the one closest in the water at the time to our friend who had perished. We chatted about the past, and the conversation turned to what happened that day. He swore me to secrecy like my uncle did before me. He said he told me he had felt hands, says he felt something swim around them. He saw flashes of silvery, battleship gray skin moving underneath the water. He felt a tug once, but said, "Oh God," as soon as it touched him, and then the feeling vanished. He went on to tell me that he thought he saw gray silver arms through the splashing water on my drowned mate's body. He swears he saw what looked to be the back of a horse's head in the splashing water. He told me he didn't say anything at the time because he thought the others would claim he was a lunatic. Oddly enough, this friend drowned shortly after he told me this story. He had gone on a fishing trip somewhere in the UK. All these events, including my friend on the fishing trip, are they due to the Kelpie? Was it truly the water horse? Number 2. The Shadow Person. I was around 15 or 16, looking after a house in a village in Ireland with my mate. We were passing time by watching TV. The first few days had been uneventful, though I did feel something weird about the place. Now you might think I could chalk that up to anything, being in a new place, eating something bad, but that wasn't all that was going on. While I was in that house, sometimes I would hear doors opening and closing, knocks and bangs on the wall, all while I was either alone or with my friend, so it couldn't have been either of us. On that particular night, the TV suddenly turned itself off when the remote was sitting right in front of us on the coffee table, and the power hadn't gone out. There was something there with us, but it wasn't going to show itself yet. That night, I was in bed feeling really apprehensive. So I stayed up in bed reading when I heard a loud pop and a blood-curdling scream coming from my friend in the next room. I quickly got up and ran to his room, flicking on the hallway light in the process. But when I grabbed his room door handle, it was red hot, and it took all my force to open the door. As soon as I got in, I stopped in my tracks. Glass from the 3 bulbs on the ceiling light was all over the floor, and my friend was curled up in the corner shouting for this thing to go, pointing to directly behind me. At the same time, something tried to push me onto the glass from behind. I immediately turned and threw a punch, but what it connected with was nothing but air and the sight of a distinct shadow of a person. A shadow that lacked actual features, and it only had contours. The thing was more like a shadow on a digital TV when it glitches, or someone silhouetted by a flickering old-style fluorescent light. I didn't feel anything solid, just the rush of air past my fist and a weird electrical shock mixed with an ice-cold feeling, something that was instinctively repulsive. Then the shadow vanished. My mate yelled, "Let's get out now." So we went to my room, picked up some cigarettes, and ran downstairs. We went out to the back garden, which had a large decked patio, fenced off, then a 10 to 15 foot drop to a lower garden with bushes and a greenhouse below. After we calmed down, we chatted about my past experiences and what happened. Suddenly, my friend fell silent, eyes wide looking up to the wall to my right. I turned, and we saw the shadow person slip, jump, and almost flicker off the wall, then rush right up to me. Instinct told me I was being attacked. I felt that electric shock, ice-cold feeling, this time in the shape of a hand, as something grabbed my face. I swung my fists around, trying to attack. I panicked, and I began to pray to my ancestors, using protective calls that I'd learned being a full-blooded gypsy. I must have struggled for a few minutes, all the time feeling that horrendous ice-cold electric shock, when suddenly I was pushed through the wooden fence on the decking and then through the glass house, the glass breaking into shards and falling all around me. I heard a guttural scream from apparently the shadow person, and I got a massive electrical jolt type thing. I looked toward the shadow with the air taken from me from the fall. The figure flicked like a dodgy strip light and seemed to dissipate and dissolve at the same time. I realized that I was completely unharmed. No cuts, no grazes, no bruises, just the wind taken from me. How can anyone fall through a wooden fence, fall 10 to 15 feet, then fall through a glass house unscathed? Somehow, I did. I picked my way out to get to my friend, who seemed to be physically ill. I made him a cup of tea to help him feel better, and eventually I got his perspective of what happened. He says the shadowy figure, when I began to call out to my ancestors, began to convulse. My prayers had maybe saved my life. We spent the rest of the night awake, as we could not sleep. When the house owner returned, we told him of what happened. The house owner already knew about this, and wasn't even surprised when I showed him the fence and glass house being broken. He says that a plague-like spirit had been haunting this place, and after speaking to some travelers in the nearby town, who gave him a method of trying to get rid of it, it only made things worse. The house still stands. The owner's still there. I've been back. But he sleeps peacefully these days. According to the owners, ever since that night with my altercation, the place is completely different and feels like a brand new home. And number 3, attacked by Fae. I was out on a long walk with my father through the countryside. We were looking in the fields where the potatoes had been picked, and would gather the ones left over and discarded by the pickers to take home for the coming winter. Gradually, we would work further and further apart, then back together down the next row. It was a slate gray day, a bit cold. The air was still with a little mist, and there were hundreds of crows silently eyeing us from a nearby clump of woods. A bit creepy, so a reason to get on with the job and get home. As I'm bent over gradually filling my little bag, I feel anxious, like I'm being watched. But not from the crows. It felt like I was being watched from somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. I tried to shrug it off. I bent over again and carried on. Suddenly, I realize there's a shadow over me, and it makes me stand upright, feeling a bit paranoid. I was just about to shout for my dad when I felt two vice-like grips on my shoulders, and something began to pull me right off the ground. I looked up, and I saw this huge winged creature. It was dark and had leathery skin with a huge beak and eyes. I instinctively yelled for my dad, who I heard holler back at me, "What the hell?" I was now at least 2 feet off the ground when I noticed lots of crows flying past my face, dive-bombing at this thing, swooping and attacking it. It dropped me from a height of about 6 feet, and I landed, bruised and shocked. As I watched the thing depart, there were more and more crows leaving their roosts, attacking and chasing this thing away. My father came running after me. He checked that I was okay and asked me about it. He had seen me off the ground as I was lifted. He saw the crows going nuts around something, but he didn't see the creature, just a gray swirling mist and the crows diving at it. We quickly picked up our bags of potatoes and headed home. Being travelers, we didn't report it, because we never really trust authority. When I got back home, there were tears just on the back of my clothes. This creature tore through 3 layers of clothes and cut through my skin as well, and it caused bruising on my shoulders where I was grabbed. My father told my mother and grandmother about the incident, and my grandmother told my mother not to treat or wash the cuts and bruises. My grandmother hurried out and came back later with a bag full of wild plants and cooked up some foul-smelling paste, which she prayed over, cooled, and applied to my cuts and bruises before sending me to bed. The following morning, my grandmother and mother checked my injuries, and they were completely gone. Many years later, my grandmother told me that potion only works on wounds inflicted by fae folk, or fairy people, or animals and things that are outside our control. A few people suggested it was an eagle, but where this took place, there are no eagles, and what I saw that day was no eagle for sure. The following story was from my top 5 Reddit submissions in December of 2017, so most of you probably haven't heard it before. It's an old one, so enjoy. This is The Worst Sleepover Ever from Joshacon. This happened a few months ago. It was the weekend, and I had a friend crashing at my place for the night. For the sake of the story, my friend's name is Dale, and around 8 my mother told us that she had to go babysit for a little while, so she left some money for us on the kitchen counter in case we needed anything. Dale and I played pretty much all the PlayStation games I had, from GTA to UFC 2, and so on. At around 9:30, I thought I heard banging at the front door. I muted the game and listened closely. It was getting louder now, and Dale heard it too. I opened my bedroom door quietly and slowly stepped downstairs, but when I got to the door, there was no one there. We tried to ignore it and just go back to playing our video games. During the second round of our fight in UFC, we heard a loud bang come from downstairs again. That's when I remembered. I forgot to lock the back door. My heart was practically beating out of my chest now, and unfortunately for us, my mobile phone was out of credits. Here in Ireland, I'm not sure how it is in America, but without credits, your mobile phone doesn't work, and mine was basically past due. And the actual landline was downstairs.
I grabbed my skateboard, holding it up as a makeshift self-defense kind of thing, and I snuck over to the door. But I could already hear the footsteps coming up the stairs. Someone had broken in our home, and they were coming right for our room. Why? Why would they come to the room where we obviously were? We were being so loud. He knew there were people up here, but instead of stealing something, he came straight for the children. I double-checked the bedroom door lock, and I tried to stop myself from having a panic attack. Then the thought hit me. My window wasn't high off the ground, so Dell and I quickly hopped out of the window and legged it over across the street to the neighbor's house. The entire time, I could hear him or her banging against my bedroom door. They sounded angry, and they sounded strong. The neighbors used the phone to call my mother and the guards. The guards are the Irish police, and they kept us safe inside the house until someone arrived. When the guards arrived, however, the intruder was gone, and I still don't know if he was caught. And needless, now I'm a little bit more careful and always remember to lock the back door. We used to live in the countryside, and I was lucky we even had a neighbor that close. But it really shows you how ignorant you can be for thinking you can leave your doors unlocked just because you live away from civilization.
The Black Hooded Figure, from Anonymous. I live in Ireland, and this story took place one summer. I have some family that live fairly close to me, and I frequently visit until late at night. They live in a suburb, so it's pretty safe there. I'm going to skip a few hours ahead, and it's 2 in the morning, so it's time for me to say goodnight and head out the door, locking it behind me. As I'm walking, it takes about 3 to 4 minutes to exit the area. The actual suburb has 1 entrance and exit for cars and 3 ways for people. As I'm walking toward the far exit, I get a strange feeling, so I turn around. That's when I see a blacked, hooded figure walking towards me, but I didn't hear footsteps. I'm a 5'6" guy and have a slim build, but I can hold my own in defense if I have to. But this was nowhere near a normal situation. Something was off. This person or entity was holding a black bag or something like it. I turned around, having my fight-or-flight instinct kick in, so I began to walk faster. I wanted to get enough distance between us that he couldn't catch up with me. As soon as I turn the corner, I break into a light jog across the road and onto the path which my estate is just down the hill of. I turn around one last time to see the same figure at the same distance, taking the same path, but somehow just walking. How he was able to keep up with me without ever running, I have no idea. I made it down the hill in record time without tripping, thank God. I ran inside my house, and I looked outside. The man had stopped moving, still with that black bag in his hands. He looked at me through my window, and I looked back. After a moment, he turned around and walked away. He left me alone, but to this day I still wonder who he was and what was in his bag. He was in my cousin's house, from Anonymous. I live in a small place in Roscommon called Scremmage. Every now and again I go to visit my cousin's place in a small village called Castleblackney. While there, I sleep in one of my cousin's rooms while she sleeps in her brother's. They're 9 and 5 respectively. One night while I was staying over, I opened the window because the room was really warm. The window opened at the top and had the hinges on the bottom. I opened the window at about 10 o'clock and climbed into bed. I dozed off around 11 to an episode of Only Fools and Horses. but I woke up to the sound of a clink. Now was probably a good time to mention I had the roof light on, so anyone could see inside, and they could see that the window was open. After hearing this, a few seconds pass, and to my horror, I see a face appear at the window, which is slightly open. The face was that of a mad man with a large smile across his face. He saw me. He raised his right hand to reveal what appeared to be a knife. He began to push on the window, as the opening was too small for his body. Luckily, that thing was pretty old and thick, and he wasn't able to push it open, not from his angle, as I sat there trying to scream, but choking. He looked at me with anger. It was a look that said I took everything from him that he loved, so I was confused and scared. Then he lowered his head, and without me hearing him leave, he was simply gone. When I ran over to see out the window, there was no trace of him. Quickly, I closed the window, and then I ran back to the bed. I prayed I was just dreaming. However, the next morning, the family found one of my uncle's ladders outside the window of the room I was sleeping in. Somehow, I had missed it. How had I not seen it the night before? Unless he came back with the ladder to get a better angle to open the window with. Also, there were scratches at every door to the house. I was too scared to ever tell them what happened to me that night, but now I feel I should have told them, because what if he had gotten inside? Ireland Shadow, from Phantom Girl 06. In March of 2009, I was about 21 years old, and I was going to Ireland. It was always my dream to go back to where my family descended from. The only thing that worried me was that even though I was with a group of students from college, I was going to another country by myself, without my parents or family. To a normal 21-year-old, that was great, but I was different. I'd never been anywhere really without my parents, and I'd never left the Midwest before. Heck, I really didn't leave Missouri all that much in 21 years. I got on the plane and flew to Ireland. The first day was great, but then I started to have separation anxiety, and I missed my parents, so I went to the local internet cafe and saw that they had phone booths. I got into the booth, and I started crying. The phone rang and I soon heard my mother's voice. I was so happy to hear it. I said, "Hey, Mom." "Sabrina, are you okay?" "No, I want to come home." "What happened?" "Well, nothing, but I would come get you. I would, but I can't. Just try to enjoy yourself." She hung up. After that, I realized it was getting dark. As I was paying the clerk at the internet cafe for using the phone, I asked about where a Temple Bar was, as I was staying at a hostel there. He told me directions, but he said it so fast that I couldn't really understand him. I tried to ask him to slow down. He did, and it helped a little bit. As I was leaving, he said something that made my blood run cold. "Watch out for shadows. They run wild, and stick to the light." As I began my walk, the streetlight near me began to dim down, and I began to hear some very odd sounds. I chalked it up to being out in another country, alone, but the noises grew louder and louder. I began to run, finding myself in a dark alley, the opposite of what the man had said. I realized how dumb my decision was, and before I could run out, I saw a figure. One that seemed to glide. My eyes widened in panic, and I saw that it was just a shadow, not a man, and it was pursuing me. I ran back to the light as fast as I could, blood seeming to freeze in my veins. I couldn't stop looking at it, and because of that, I caught sight of 2 red dots at the top of it, as if they were eyes. I felt as if they were trying to do something to me, but I didn't know what. I had to run. I had to get away from it. I remember being so scared that I even pulled out my phone to record a quick message, stating my name and age in a panic, told them where I was from and where I was at the time. I then said that I love you, Mom and Dad. I could soon make out lights at the end of the alley. It was the lights from my hostel. All I had to do was keep running to the light, so I did. But I could both hear it, but not hear it, behind me. It was like my mind knew it was there, and it was making the sound effects for me in my panic. When I made it to the doors, I burst through and fell on the stairs in front of the desk, scaring the crap out of the night crew. One of them asked me, "You okay?" I was catching my breath, so I simply nodded. Could I please have the room key?" They complied, and I quickly went to my room with the other people. I guess my moral here is if you travel in a buddy system. If you walk around, don't go alone. And definitely listen to what the locals have to offer as advice. If they tell you to stick to the roads near the lights because the shadows come alive, you'd better take it to heart. Even on the Emerald Isle, known for its natural beauty and carefree locals, you can find the most explicit and visceral of horrors. There's no escape in this world from that which haunts us, from that which we don't understand. Horror, fear, it is ingrained in our very beings. For so long as we can feel pain and be hunted, we will feel pain and we will be hunted. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have your own scary experience, especially if it's about backpacking, I want to hear it. Send it to us at darkstories.org. Check the links in the description to support the show. There's a link to donate on Patreon and a link to my merch store. Thank you. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode, titled, "I Hear Chewing in My Attic," and 4 other true scary stories. Pagilla says, "I hear chewing in my attic. Well, I hear moaning in my mom's room, but I'm not complaining. Well, thanks for the laugh and the other kind of nightmares." Hemet Chan says, "Nom nom noises." Well, when you put it like that, it's not as creepy and I want to hug it. Twitter Glitter says, "That's just me getting a snack at 3 a.m. You know, if you eat too late, you're gonna have nightmares." That's what I was always told, but it was a lie. All I get is freaking heartburn. Fire Chocolate says, "Can't wait to listen to these stories. I love your voice and go to sleep to it every night. Yeah, my wife gets to hear it every day, filled with a thick accent that I can't help with sometimes." Zeldasaurus Rex says, "I think darkness is the chewing I hear under my bed during the night. Thanks for the awesome videos." You're welcome. And if you do hear me chewing, it's definitely a pizza Lunchable. Man, I can't get enough of those. I recently tried those uploaded versions with the sandwiches. They're pretty good, but double the meat and double the cheese, and I'm sold for life. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode, but don't you worry, more scary stories are coming soon. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who light up my life. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.